Hey everyone, it's Rachel from Sugar Maple Farmhouse, and today I'm going to show you how to make DIY flower frogs from oven baked clay. The end of summer in late August, early September is really peak flower season here. It's when all of our zinnias and cosmos and dahlias, the straw flowers, and our wildflower fields are really doing their best. Since we have so much natural beauty right now, I decided to make some flower frogs so that I could arrange my flowers and show them off. You may be asking yourself, what's a flower frog? And a flower frog is simply a piece that goes on top of a vase or inside a vase to help hold flowers in place. A lot of people love the look of vintage flower frogs, which usually go inside the vase. However, I decided to make some flower frogs out of oven-baked clay that go on top of the vase. And I really wanted these to be beautiful too, since they were going to be seen. To make these, you want to start with some oven-baked clay or some air-dry clay. Now you can also make these out of pottery clay if you're a potter. I'm a novice potter, but this is something I really wanted to do for the blog and really wanted to do for kind of those crafty people who love to make things like this but aren't necessarily potters. You can do this craft simply at home with either oven-baked clay or air-dry clay. When I'm working on a project like this, I love to use oven-baked clay simply because I can get a project done in one day. With air-dry clay, you have to wait for it to dry, and that's usually overnight or 24 hours, so it just really depends on what clay you're using. But with oven-baked clay, it just takes 15 minutes in the oven, and you are set to go on to the next step. No matter which clay you're working on for this project, you're going to want to roll it out first and flatten it. So I started by pounding the clay on the table and then simply rolling it with a rolling pin. The two pieces I have on the side are pottery tools. They are helping me make it an even thickness. You do not necessarily need these. I do think you should put a piece of plastic or a piece of parchment paper underneath this on your work surface so that you can roll out the clay on that versus any kind of table or countertop. Once the clay is rolled out to maybe 1/3 of an inch or even half an inch thick, you can go on to the next step. So what I did for most of these was I took lace and I laid it over my clay, and then I just simply pressed the lace into the clay itself. You do want to have a rolling pin available for this project, and I would say that once you start using the rolling pin on clay, you do not want to use it for food anymore. Once my lace was imprinted on my clay, I used cookie cutters and I cut out the shapes in the clay. Make sure you press it in really well and get it all the way through the clay. I tried to get at least 2 out of each kind of clay piece that I rolled out. It wasn't always possible. Take your excess clay and then put it off to the side. You can re-roll it once you're done to make more. To make the holes in the DIY clay flower frogs, I used a skewer from the kitchen. It was a simple tool. I'm sure a lot of people have those on hand. I have some pottery tools too that I could have used, but I wanted to see how this worked, and I think if you just have some skewers, they'll be perfect for making your holes. Now I will say that when making your holes in the flower frogs, make sure to make them large enough. My holes here are fine for my zinnias, my cosmos, the straw flowers, but I did have some trouble with some sunflowers, even some of my smaller ones, and some of my dahlias as well, especially when it came to the leaf nodes, because even if the stem can fit through, the leaf nodes usually make the stem just a little wider. So if you want to use this for some dahlias or some small sunflowers or anything that has a little bit of a thicker stem, make your holes a little thicker too. I did use some other shapes with the cookie cutters that actually ended up being better for some of these larger flower stems, and I'll show you why and explain why to you in a few minutes. Once you have all the holes made, the next step is to bake your flower frogs. I found that I did have some trouble getting them to come off of the parchment paper, but I ended up cutting the paper and that was fine. If you're using plastic, they should actually come off the plastic a little bit better than they were going to come off this. But this is a solution. You can just take them right from the parchment paper, cut it up, and plop them on a cookie sheet into the oven. So like I mentioned, I did end up using some other shapes that I really enjoyed using. This sun shape I really liked. I love the way it looked at the end. And then I made a flower. I actually at the time didn't have the flower cookie cutter I wanted, so I used a snowflake and then I formed it with my hands, which I'm not going to go through and show you guys today, but when you want kind of some bigger spaces on the side, using a cookie cutter like this sun one or some flowers with larger leaves, those work really well. And then you can put the larger stems on the outside where there's space between your flower frog and the jar or the vase. Here is everything before it went into the oven. Just make sure you're following the directions on the clay that you're using. I will leave my clay that I used in a link in the description below if you want to use the same kind that I used. And follow the directions, put it in the oven, and then you should be good to go. When the flower frogs come out of the oven, if you have any kind of edges that are a little rough or just pieces you want to take off, you can do that with some sandpaper and water. When it comes to clay, it's really important that you wet sand. So I am wetting my sandpaper and sanding the clay. Clay, no matter what kind of clay you're using, can be damaging to your lungs, and wet cleaning up or wet sanding is the best way to go when you want to clean up those edges. I also have this pottery tool that I was able to use to go in and grab some of the rougher edges that were left after the cookie cutters. If you don't have something like this, which I imagine most people don't, you could probably also use a spoon to do this. Just something kind of with a nice kind of scrapable edge that can go in and help you clean up those hangy pieces kind of from the bottom of the cookie cutters. When it was time to paint the flower frogs, I really thought I was going to go with pastel colors and make them really light and pretty, and it turns out I hated how all of those colors looked on the flower frogs. So instead, I really focused on metallics. I thought the metallics looked really good on these and gave them more of that vintage look, especially with the imprinted lace. I will leave a link in the description below that links to the blog post that has all the paint colors and a link to my Amazon list that also has the paint colors. I will also have all the supplies in the blog post and all the supplies included on that Amazon list. The last thing I ended up doing to the flower frogs was taking a black wax and waxing the finish. So I loved the way this looked with this color specifically, which is Warren Penny. I loved how it looked with my bright bronze color. The only color I didn't absolutely love the way this looked with was the gold. I preferred the gold without the wax finish on it. So you can do whatever you want. You don't even have to use the wax finish if you want. I just really thought that this brought out some of the kind of the nooks and the crannies, and it made the flower frogs a lot more vintage looking. You can see down below in the corner, and my hand is now kind of covering it, that brighter green color. I actually didn't like that color, so I just tossed that flower frog. I really did prefer these metallics. I have a darker green color that I preferred more over that bright green, but you can do these really whatever color you want to do them. Here is that flower that I shaped earlier that I mentioned from a snowflake cookie cutter, and then I kind of carved into the surface to just give it some depth. I really felt like the wax made this piece in particular look fabulous. Here is where I tried the wax on the gold, and you'll be able to see like it just tones down the color a little too much, and it just didn't make it look good. So I put it on there and then I did my best to go back in and wipe it all off. And then I didn't put it on my other gold piece. But I didn't get all of it because it did sink into some of the cracks here. I think it looks fine. I think it looks good still. This is one of my favorite shapes and one of my favorite colors. Here is a good sampling of the flower frogs that I made. Like I said, I really loved how the metallics turned out. I also loved the kind of the different shapes. So I love this bronzed flower. I also love this sun one and the other flower that's in here. I just think those shapes are so fun. When it comes to sizing these for different vases, I will tell you I made these specifically to fit wide mouth mason jar vases. I use just ball mason jars all the time as flower vases around here and for random kind of stuff. So I made these to fit specifically on top of those. And to do that, you can just take whatever vase you are using or whatever kind of vessel you are using and see if your cookie cutter sits nicely on top of it. If you're making these as a gift, you obviously won't know, but the size of the wide mouth mason jar is a good kind of standard size, I think, for most vases. They should fit nicely either on top or just down inside kind of the neck of the vase. I did have 2 pieces of lace that I used on these, and you can kind of see the different patterns on these 2 flower frogs here. I will tell you, I preferred the piece of lace that has this smaller pattern that's on the gold flower frog, and I just liked it because when you're putting holes in it, I think it just looks a little bit more dainty and it looks a little bit more vintage. And that piece of lace is actually from Amazon, and I will have it on the Amazon list for you if you want to get that specific piece and make the same pattern that I made. But of course, you can buy lace from anywhere or you can use home lace. Just make sure it's not something that you're going to use again. With this project, you want to make sure that if you are using lace, you kind of reserve it for any clay projects you have in the future and don't try to go use it with something else. These are my mason jars I used to measure, and again, you can see how nicely everything kind of just fits into the holes. I really love, again, that sun one and just the way it looks on top of there. The scalloped ones looked really beautiful as well. If you want to use the same cookie cutters that I used, they are also on that Amazon list. I sometimes just find it's easier to order stuff through there when I'm looking, and I always reserve my cookie cutters that I use for clay for just clay. So keep that in mind. You don't want to use something you bake with a lot for a clay project of any kind. And here is how they look all done and displayed. I really love how they turned out. I don't have them stuffed full here, but of course, you can do whatever you want. If you want to stuff yours full, go ahead and do that. I really wanted to be able to show you guys how everything kind of fit in here and how you really could make a great arrangement using one of these flower frogs. They really just allow all the flowers to have a little space and really make arranging kind of fun. You can see what I meant here about the sun giving a little more space in the gaps of the design for some of those bigger stems. It worked out really well for the sunflowers specifically. I hope you all enjoyed this craft. I really do think it is one of the easier ones to do and would be something you could even do with kids or just anyone who loves flowers and loves to arrange them. Thank you guys so much for following along today. I hope you enjoyed the DIY flower frogs, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment section below. Also, in the description below, I will leave a link to the full blog post with all the details and that Amazon supply list. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I hope that you'll subscribe so you can follow along with all the things we're doing here. I cook, I garden, I craft, kind of a little bit of everything, but I'd love to have you. Have a great day, everyone.